Herodotus lived during the 5th century before the Common Era in ancient Greece. He wrote a narrative summarizing history as it was then known and describing many of the events of his own lifetime. Although direct discussion on his biases and epistemology is saved for the conclusion of the series, on this video you may learn details about a portion of his work. The third book, called Thalia, Part 1 of 2, Madness Conquers. Herodotus begins this third book by describing what might have motivated Cambyses to invade Egypt. The more convincing story is that Cambyses asked for a daughter of Amasis, the then pharaoh. The Egyptian, since he knew his daughter would be made into a mere concubine, responded by secretly giving him another woman in pretension. Yet, this woman, in revenge for the fact that the pharaoh had killed her father, revealed her identity to Cambyses. This deceit, according to the Persians, caused the conflict. Let it be known that the historian also reports the Egyptian version of the story, but let me skip over it. Herodotus spends some time discussing the difficulty or wonder that it was to invade Egypt. Cambyses had to secure an alliance with the Arabian tribes, and he had to create the infrastructure to pass the Sinai Desert with a large army. This involved setting up a system still existing by Herodotus' time where jars of water would be frequently distributed through the desert route. Curiously, the historian himself visited the site of the key battle in the Persian conquests and says he found that the Egyptian skulls, from the remaining carcasses, were much stronger than that of the Persians. He hypothesizes a reason, as he says,
"The Egyptians beginning from their early childhood shave their heads, and the bone is thickened by exposure to the sun. And this is also the cause of their not becoming bald-headed. For among the Egyptians you see fewer bald-headed men than among any other race."
I know that vitamin D from the sun is key in generating and healing bones. Thus, perhaps he is partially correct. Given the Persian triumph, some of the bordering Ethiopians and other nearby societies of Africa peacefully surrendered to the Persians. There will be more on the long-lived Ethiopians. For now, however, enters the narrative a most heartbreaking story about Samanitos, the son of Amasis. It turns out that Cambyses paraded the daughters of Egyptian nobles as new slaves and over 2,000 noble sons that would soon be executed. Samanitos, who did not shed a tear during this whole procession, later wept when he saw a former friend turned street beggar. Cambyses asks him why he cries for that man and not his own children. The former pharaoh replies,
"O son of Cyrus, my own troubles were too great for me to lament them aloud. But the trouble of my companion was such as called for tears, seeing that he has been deprived of great wealth, and has come to beggary upon the threshold of old age."
Croesus, the former king discussed in the first book, cried upon hearing this. The latter in turn took pity from the answer and decided not to kill the former pharaoh and ordered that his son be spared. Yet, the son had already been executed, as he was the first of the 2,000 boys that were killed. To finish the whole heartache, it later happens that Samanitos is found inciting rebellion, and rather than suffer punishment, he drank raw bull's blood, which is apparently a very effective method of suicide. Cambyses gave orders that the former pharaoh's body be burned, be consumed by fire. Herodotus explains that this is most sacrilegious not only to the Egyptians, who believed in mummifying for the very purpose of preserving the body, but also to the Persians who took fire to be a god and thus most impious to feed a human to a god. Egyptians say that they managed to trick Cambyses into unwittingly burning someone else's corpse, but the historian thinks
that the Egyptians make pretense of it from pride, and with no good ground.
Cambyses, still ambitious, planned to invade none other than the Carthaginians. Yet, the Phoenicians refused to collaborate, as that would be like going to war with brothers. Remember, Carthage was founded and settled by them. Cambyses did not dare force them, as
the whole naval force was dependent upon the Phoenicians.
As a result, the king shifted goals to the Ethiopians. He sent messengers, spies, to them, and the Ethiopians' king replied to these messengers is more worthy of quote.
"Neither did the king of the Persians send you bearing gifts, because he thought it a matter of great moment to become my guest friend. Nor do ye speak true things, for ye have come as spies of my kingdom. Give this counsel to the king of the Persians, that when the Persians draw their bows of equal size to mine, as easily as I do this, then he should march against the long-lived Ethiopians, provided that he be superior in numbers.
The movies they could make, the scenes that lie in waiting. Truly, as with Plutarch, each book could be turned into at least one, if not several, movies. Remember, you can also learn about Plutarch's writings on this channel. In further discourse, the Persian messengers learned that the Ethiopians live up to 120 years of age, allegedly, that they ate mostly boiled meat. I say that is the healthiest way of eating meat, especially if it is boiled using an electromagnetic oven, and drank mostly milk, as the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche insisted all men should. Apparently, they had a most special fountain, one whose water was so light that common wood, or just about anything, would sink in it. Herodotus says of this,
If this water which they have be really such as it is said to be, it would doubtless be the cause of why the people are long-lived, as making use of it for all the purposes of life.
Also, gold among them was so common that their money was measured on the rarer bronze. It reminds me of the Mesoamericans who valued jade. Cambyses, already showing signs of madness, invades without proper preparations, meaning without proper supply. Thus, he meets a Crassus-like fate. More has Mark Antony given that he personally survives, but much of his army is destroyed by mere hunger and thirst. When he gets back to Egypt, things only get worse. First, since the Egyptians were amid a celebration, it turned out that a special cow, yes cow, had appeared and that this was either an actual or sign of a deity. The emperor did not know this and thought they were celebrating his defeat. When they explained it to him, Cambyses did not believe the tale and thus ordered scores of people executed. Then, upon gaining attendance before the cow, he tried to kill it and ended up stabbing it in the leg, the thigh. Yes, the madman tried to kill the beloved cow. Of course, all this was an outrage to the Egyptians. Yet, that was but the mere beginning of the harms of hereditary tyranny. First, he had his brother killed. A brother whom
He had sent away from Egypt in envy, because alone of all the Persians he had been able to draw the bow which the messengers brought from the Ethiopian king to an extent of about 2 finger breadths.
I found the detail curious, LOL. He did likewise with one of his sisters. Then he started marrying his other sisters, the inbreeding that plagued the species. He did other horrible things. For example, after he killed a child whose father had attempted to advise him against madness, he told the very father,
Prexasps, it has now been made evident, as thou sayest, that I am not mad, but that it is the Persians who are out of their senses.
I quote it as a typical insane person thing to say. Similarly, good old Croesus also met the axe. The former advisor of Cyrus attempted to help correct him, and the madman responded with such fury that he ordered him executed. Yet, Croesus is saved by some guards thinking that the mad king will change his mind, or forget, and ask to have him again. Eventually, Cambyses does that very thing and finding that Croesus is still alive is glad, but nonetheless executes the guards that disobeyed him. Again, typical mad ruler things, LOL. Luckily, the madness eventually affronts the gods. He mocks the images of the Egyptian Hephaestos and has some of the images burnt. This leads the historian into a brief digression in which he asserts that all men would choose their own customs over that of others, thus the subjective nature of such valuations. To substantiate or prove this claim, the writer makes reference to Darius. The latter, it is told, asked some Hellenes if they would take money in exchange for eating the corpses of their parents. The Greeks were, of course, outraged at the proposition. Yet, Darius then asked some Indians if they would burn the corpses of their parents in exchange for some money, and these were outraged by this opposite proposition. To be clear, it is told that the Indians would eat their deceased parents. There is more of this later, and, of course, the Greeks would burn their dead. Herodotus then quotes Pindar.
Of all things, custom is king.
Of the latter, I should note, it is often translated as law, rather than custom or tradition, but I think that my translation is the truer. I mean, the historian just explained it. So, if you ever hear anyone say law is king, please correct them. At this point, Herodotus switches focus back to the Greeks. He tells about the first time that any Greeks fought in Asia. It had happened that a certain tyrant named Polycrates had taken command of the island of Samos. This man had made an alliance with Cambyses, the former Egyptian pharaoh. This Greek tyrant's life was faring so pleasantly that the pharaoh gave him the following counsel.
Take thought and consider, and that which thou findest to be the most valued by thee, and for the loss of which thou wilt most be vexed in thy soul, that take and cast away in such a manner that it shall never again come to the sight of men.
The reasoning being that none may live a life of absolute good fortune, thus best to be the bringer of misfortune oneself than wait a possibly worse turn from fate. Now that is some ancient wisdom. I personally fear it might actually be correct. LOL. Polycrates agreed with the advice and decided to throw away a ring, a very valuable signet. He threw it far into the sea, yet, as if it were a fable, again, all this could be made into a movie. A Samian fisherman caught a very large and tasty-looking fish. This fish was so much so that, though the fisherman was poor, he offered it as a gift to Polycrates. The latter was gladdened by the gift and invited the fisherman to dine with him. Then, as would be expected from a fable, the royal cooks found the signet within the fish. The fish had eaten it before being caught. Polycrates was overjoyed as any would be at the amazing turn of fate. Yet, Cambyses, upon hearing about these events, concluded
that it was impossible for man to rescue man from the event which was to come to pass, and that Polycrates was destined not to have a good end. Therefore he sent an envoy to him in Samos, and said that he broke off the guest friendship, and this he did lest when a fearful and great mishap befell Polycrates, he might himself be grieved in his soul as for a man who was his guest.
This was all to describe the man whom the Lacedaemonians, the Spartans, were embarked against. They were doing so in part to revenge the theft of a priceless bull that was once sent to Croesus. This is told in the first book, but I had skipped mentioning it as I knew we would return to it. The Spartans were not the only ones arrayed against Polycrates. There also was Periander, the wise Corinthian king. In Herodotus' explanation of why the Corinthians had a grudge against Samos, he enters into a digression of why the Corinthians had a similar grudge against Corcyra, a city they themselves had once founded. Meaning, the narrative contains a digression within a digression. LOL. By the way, in case you have forgotten, Periander is one of the 7 wise men of antiquity. One could say that he was a philosopher king before philosophy. Yet, alas, the ensuing story does not do him any favors. Apparently, Periander had dispatched some 300 boys to be made into eunuchs. These boys were from leading families of Corcyra. Unfortunately, the historian does not tell the backdrop of this. I know that Corcyra was settled by Corinth, and as such it could be called a colony, but it was not common that the father city would control the colony in any way. It was, however, uncommon for such cities to do each other harm. I should mention, according to Thucydides, it is a conflict between Corinth and Corcyra that starts the Great War between Athens and Sparta, what is often called the Peloponnesian War, but I agree with Xenophon, it should be called the Pan-Hellenic War. Of course, you may also learn about all these historians on this channel. Be it as it may be, in a humanitarian spirit, the people of Samos rescue these boys from castration. So, that is a reason for Periander's involvement against Samos, but not a complete explanation of his issue with Corcyra. It turns out that the king of Corinth killed his own wife and mother of his 2 children. Far from the thing one would expect from a philosopher king. Long story made short, the father of the deceased woman, another king, tells the boys about how their mother died. One of the 2 was, apparently, rather stupid and did not care. The other, however, ceased to speak with his father, and Periander ended up exiling him. Apparently, Periander ruled it illegal for anyone to help his exiled son. Therefore, the boy
laid about in the porticos enduring exposure. And on the 4th day after this, Periander, seeing him fallen into squalid misery and starvation, felt pity for him.
Yet, the boy would not return to the murder of his mother. Eventually, Periander, growing old and finding that his other son could not be given rule, accorded with the exiled to change places. He, the king, would go to Corcyra, where the boy was, and the boy would, in synchronization, go to rule in Corinth. It must be said, surely Periander was wise, as it appears from other writings, but no human is perfect. Either way, the Corcyraeans, not wishing to have Periander present, killed his son and broke all ties with Periander. Obviously, the historian withholds part of the story. Back to the invasion of Samos, the mainly Spartan force fails to capture the city, but the historian attributes this as the first time any Greek, especially any Dorian Greek, fought in Asia. The term Dorian refers to something akin to the modern notion of race. Some Greeks, racist Greeks, believed that there was Dorian Greeks and Ionians Greeks, LOL. So much for the simultaneous events occurring in Greece. Returning to Egypt and the Persians, two of Cambyses' half-brothers, not pure Persians, but rather part Mede or Magians, attempted to usurp the throne. They did so in a clandestine fashion, however. One of them pretended to be the recently killed full brother of Cambyses, the one that Cambyses had executed over the jealousy regarding the Ethiopian vow. Remember, as it will be key, these rebels were secretly not Persians. Cambyses first inquired as to whether his brother had indeed been killed as he had ordered. After becoming convinced that the rebellion was being perpetrated by impostors, he attempted to ride from Egypt back to Persia. However, the vengeance of the insulted god struck. As he mounted his horse, Cambyses accidentally mortally wounded his leg. It was the same leg, on the same spot, where he had struck the cow the Egyptians were formerly revering. He did not die right away, rather his wound became infected, and he had time to write to the Persian leaders that they should avenge his death. In the second half of this book, the Persians not only recover their empire, but Herodotus also reminds us of what is real democracy, and what are the arguments made against it and in favor of it. Now, to pique your curiosity, to motivate you to watch the last video of the series, I gift you a teaser sample of one of the many aphorisms I crafted as I read this author.
The more the successful becomes aware of his own flaws, the more he is convinced that his greater talent is luck.
If you enjoy or gain from my aphorisms, know that I have thousands. I will be writing books with short thematic essays composed out of aphorisms. These essays are profound and intriguing yet easy to read. For very cheap copies, look up Protagoras Pause in the Amazon website. I repeat, Protagoras Pause, that's my name.